Hello and welcome back to another episode of Taking Control of Cancer, the podcast brought to you by the North East London Cancer Alliance. I'm Steve Bland and this episode is all about skin safety in the sun, skin cancer, busting all the myths and giving you all the information that you need to stay skin safe. It's a really important topic, isn't it? The number of new melanoma skin cancer cases diagnosed in a year has just risen above 20,000 for the first time in the UK. That's according to Cancer Research UK. Here in North East London alone, there were 1,721 cases of skin cancer diagnosed last year, making it the most common cancer. And it's more important than ever that you understand what you can do to help prevent it. It's a topic we've done before, and I'm joined once again by Dr. Tom McLeod, who's a clinical lead for the Skin Expert Reference Group here at the North East London Cancer Alliance. Also by Rosie O'Day, who's a project manager in diagnosis and treatment at the Alliance. But we're also joined this time by Claire Milne, who is the health editor at Full Fact, the fact checkers. They're bringing us the expertise in how we tackle misinformation, how we bust myths, make sure that what we're telling you is absolutely correct. So as I said, excuse the references to a sunny day. We recorded it when it was extremely warm, but let's have a listen. Thank you all for joining me. We did this episode last year, didn't we, Tom and Rosie, where we got into a bit of this. We said at the time, there's a load more we can go into, so we need to revisit. I know there was something at the end of the summer, wasn't there, Rosie? You guys tried to launch a campaign and it absolutely poured down. Wasn't there you took one of your mobile vans somewhere and it absolutely tipped it down?
Yeah, last year we had an ice cream van that was repurposed as a sunscreen van, and we brought it to Victoria Park so that we could, raise some awareness around how to protect your skin and stay safe in the sun as part of the London Gets Sunset campaign. And it's funny, the day we chose, it had been gorgeous weather all week, and we were drenched, but it was a really good reminder that actually you do need sunscreen, whatever the weather.
Yeah.
And then, towards the afternoon, it got really, really sunny. And, we had conversations all day long with kind of residents in Northeast London. It was a really good and valuable day to learn more about people's thoughts, opinions, and beliefs around sun safety and SPF as well. So it was a good day.
Yeah, sounds like a really good day. I mean, we get plenty of rainy days. I'm up in the north of England, so like a rainy day, you couldn't choose a sunny day up here. Although this weekend, we're recording this on the 21st of May, and I think we're about to get a really nice little sunny week, aren't we, ahead of us? So this is really good timing. Last year in northeast London alone, there were 1,721 cases of skin cancer diagnosed, making it the most common cancer. And we hear all the time, don't we, Tom? Loads of advice about sunshine, tanning, sun cream, social media, celebrities. There's a piece in The Guardian last week highlighting growing concerns around the rise of extreme tanning. Feels like there probably hasn't been a more appropriate time to do something like this, and maybe not a more dangerous time for young people in terms of the messaging and the information they're getting or not getting.
Yeah, it's tricky because there's lots of messages out there. There's lots of benefits to being outside and in the sun, and also let's call a spade a spade. People like looking tanned. It's a tale as old as time. And I'll share with you a quick anecdote. I was watching the Champions League semi-final the other day, and this bronze beauty just leapt from the screen, and I turned to my partner and I said, "Wow, this guy looks incredible." And with a perverse twist of fate, it transpires that this guy is actually some kind of UV denier, that hates sunscreen, recently dressed up as a sunscreen bottle. So when I was researching a bit for this or preparing for this podcast, I couldn't believe that the same guy that I was applauding for his beautiful coverage was suddenly also someone like the antithesis of kind of what I talk to patients about on a weekly basis in primary care and also in skin cancer clinics. So there's a lot out there. So there's in terms of the actual kind of messaging, I guess the other problem is there's this issue about vitamin D, and people are very keen to know about how they're going to get their vitamin D, and I'm sure we can go into that. But I think, like everything in life, it's all about moderation, isn't it? I think you can't be too hard line and say don't ever go in the sun, because clearly there are benefits to being outside. Mental health, exercise, being active, vitamin D. The list is endless. But similarly, doing things in extreme ways, for example, uh, seeking out the high. I think with that Guardian article that you referenced, they talk about people who seek out the highest UV index in the day, and then they go and sit in that. That is completely at odds with some of our messaging as to avoid the sun in the highest UV index points of the day. And then there are other practices which are just really bad for you. For example, the likes of nasal sprays, which I think have now been completely banned, and they're unregulated products. So I think, in short, it's about moderation, and we'll discuss a few practical points to how to keep safe. But yeah, it's important that we get the messaging and the tone right, I think.
And Claire, there's obviously lots of misinformation, lots of myth busting to do in loads of the areas that we talk about when it comes to cancer. But it seems to me like skin safety and sun safety is probably right up there in terms of areas that we need to be really, really, really clear with. uh, I don't want to kind of typecast, but like the young generation probably, really needs this myth busting.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, we just speaking about the time of year and the weather and things, we often see a sort of uptake in misinformation related to sunscreen, suntan, that kind of thing at this time of year. And I think from our perspective as fact checkers, it's about making sure that people are equipped with the right information, that they know where to go to get the best information in order to keep themselves safe in the sun. And it's the sort of thing where, the preventative steps that you can take are fairly straightforward things, put some sun cream on, that kind of thing. So from our perspective, it's about making sure that people know where to go to get good information, because it's, something where having bad information, being exposed to misinformation about these kind of things can cause, serious harm, when people are using that kind of information to make decisions about their own health.
Yeah, I was just saying before we started recording that I do a lot of work in a rugby club, and some of the younger people. I'm in my 40s now, so I say younger people in their 20s. I was chatting to them the other day, and one of them said, "I don't believe in sun cream." And I was like, "We need to have a chat. You need to listen to some podcasts, because it's." And this is a guy who's got ginger hair, fair skin, and I just looked at him like, "You're in the sun all day. You're coaching kids to play rugby. Your job is outside, and you're saying you don't believe in sun cream." And I don't even know where to start with it, to be honest, Tom. And I think that's probably quite an extreme thing, because I imagine the majority of people. I mean, you tell me. The majority of people, I imagine, would have a base knowledge of you don't stay out too long. Reapply your sun cream. Maybe reapply it after you've been in the water.
Well, I think it's probably helpful to just get into how sun creams work,
Yeah.
and why we put them on, as a starter. In terms of why we do this, it all starts with the sun, of course. The sun emits radiation in lots of different ways: infrared, visible light, UV radiation. And with regards to kind of skin cancer, we're specifically talking about UV radiation. UV radiation, just like the alphabet, comes in A, B, C. C gets blocked out by the ozone, so we don't need to worry about that. B, helpfully, is the UV radiation that burns you, B for burns, and A is the UV radiation that penetrates deepest into the skin. This is the one that, for want of a better phrase, smashes your collagen, and that's why people who spend lots and lots of time in the sun, that as they get older, their skin becomes more lax, because they just simply don't have the collagen anymore in their skin. So there are two main types of sun creams. There are mineral, also sometimes called inorganic, and then there's chemical, sometimes. No, so it's basically mineral versus chemical. The mineral ones are the ones that sit predominantly on the surface of the skin, and they work in two ways. They absorb some of the UV, but they also reflect the UV, and they're the ones that often are bright colors. You might remember from the 90s, the Aussie cricket teams with their white sunblock often come in like neon colors. And they are just simply reflecting the UV radiation. The ones that are absorbed into the skin, they're the chemical ones, they simply absorb UV radiation. So that's how sun creams work. They're essentially trying to reduce the power or the impact of UV radiation that comes from the sun. A is the one that ages you and does contribute a bit to skin cancer. B is the one that burns you and definitely contributes to skin cancer.
Okay, right. Let's start off with, going off the back of that. Then let's start off with tanning, because we all want to tan, don't we? I'm married to a half Italian, half Irish woman. She's definitely got the Irish side on her skin, but would still like a bit of color on her skin. How do you tan safely? Is there a way of tanning safely? And another one. I took two questions. The other one, we used to always say, so I think I said last time on this podcast that I used to work in Menorca and spent a bit of time in Brazil as well. There was I was going to say common myth, common feeling among people that I worked with, that as you got through the summer, we were there for about 6 months, but as you got through the summer, your skin built up a sort of a base level of tan, which then protected you and meant you didn't have to put as much sun cream on later. Is that a myth? Is that right? And is there such thing as a safe tan? Who wants to crack up?
I'm going to lead with this one if it's okay, because I did a bit of a sweep poll, or a straw poll, sorry, I should say, with my colleagues in dermatology just this week. Because the other thing is, we have to also say, people want to have a tan because it looks nice. So how far do we push this messaging? So in terms of like the actual science behind the base tan, what happens when this UV radiation hits? So the UVA causes an immediate kind of darkening of the skin. And essentially what's happening there, the pigment creating cells, the melanocytes, our pigment is held within melanosomes, and all that happens is the body just says, I don't like this radiation, we're just going to spread out as much of this melanin containing stuff as we possibly can. So you get this immediate kind of response to the sun. Where the kind of base tan stuff comes in, that's more UVB. It's a slower process. So what happens is the UV radiation, the UVB, triggers your cells to start making more stimulating hormone, which causes the pigment making cells to make more of the stuff. But much like a factory, it takes time to kind of increase the output. So so the UVA responds immediately to the demand, and then the UVB causes the melanocytes to make a base tan. Now, so there is some science in it. If you expose yourself to UV radiation, you will get more melanin protection, but it's not a huge degree. It's about SPF 3 or 4. So even if you say, yeah, I really want to go for this base tan, yeah, you're right, but it's not going to give you anywhere near the kind of protection that you can get from a bottle. For context, black skin is about SPF 15. So even still, like even with the darkest skin type, it's still not giving you a huge degree of protection. So I hope that kind of answers your question. So
Yeah.
I think there probably is some science in it. I think the main key thing is don't get burnt, because we know that burn is a sign of skin damage and is the kind of highest kind of risk factor for leading to skin cancer. So don't get burnt. Slow incremental exposure to some degree of sun is probably going to give you a small degree of protection, but it's not huge. SPF 4, max 15.
Claire, what are the kind of big myths around tanning that you guys kind of have up your sleeve in terms of misinformation?
Yeah, so this idea of there being, a sort of protective element to tanning is one that we've definitely seen. And as Tom said, there's maybe some sort of small kernel there in terms of that SPF 3 sort of 4 level he was talking about, but not really sort of in the way that often we see this claim made, which is something that we see with a lot of information. Really, there's maybe some small kernel of sort of science or health-based information behind it there, but actually when that's taken out of context or removed from the fact that started it, it becomes sort of misinformation that can cause harm. So that's definitely something we see. We also see the idea that there's maybe a bit of benefit that could outweigh the risk of sun exposure. So we see claims made about vitamin D and things like that, and also claims about sun cream itself being being possibly more harmful than sun exposure as well. So one thing that we have seen quite a bit of in terms of claims is the idea that possibly ingredients in the sunscreen or the way the sunscreen acts on your skin can in fact cause cancer in itself. And when we're fact checking that's we dig into obviously any of the claims about specific ingredients, things like that people are talking about, but generally the sort of the message is that that's not correct. The sunscreen that you're going to be putting on is going to be lowering your risk of cancer by blocking those UV rays and things that Tom was talking about, and it's the sun itself that we should be wary of in this scenario.
And Rosie, when you go out and you talk to people, you take your sunscreen van out and you go and have these conversations with people who are generally people, I imagine, sitting around in the park having a picnic, wanting a bit of a tan. Are these the kind of things that you hear?
Yeah, I think the campaign last year was pretty eye-opening in some of the myths that, you know, live around kind of sun cream and also sun safety. I think even just researching for the campaign, my social media algorithm was just kind of rife with, messages of sun safety that are accurate from established and well regarded sources. But then there were a lot of different kind of videos around, glamorizing kind of sunbeds and tanning, and, even some that claim I don't put sunscreen on my children because of the cancer causing chemicals it contains. And when you have a large following, I think that can be quite harmful to release into the public. So podcasts like this and getting out and speaking to people, and sharing information in a non-judgmental way is so important, because I think more than ever, we have access to information at our fingertips, really. And it's so important that the information we do share is accurate, and it's based on evidence and it's based on data. So that's one of the reasons that I think the campaign was so important. And I think on the back of our last podcast, it became really clear that there's definitely some work to do around myth busting, especially for young people, that are kind of having these social media algorithms pop up, and who do you trust in that instance?
Yeah. That is tricky, isn't it? We see it across all different cancer types, don't we?
Yeah.
You'll get somebody with no real medical background or real knowledge, going off on one, and all of a sudden that becomes fact, and that must make your life difficult, Claire. Trying to cut through all the stuff that, like you say, there's probably a kernel of sense and actual legitimacy to what people are saying quite often, but they've gone way beyond that, and it potentially influence a lot of people.
Yeah, definitely. And I think what's we always try and bear in mind, most often people are sharing this information because they want to try and help other people, the friends, people that they interact with online and that kind of thing. And whilst, yes, I think there is often an element to misinformation, that people have maybe deliberately spread something, or it's more of a disinformation, that kind of thing. A lot of the time, misinformation is somewhere along the way something's gotten twisted or misunderstood, and people are sharing it in good faith, thinking that they're helping. But what ends up happening is that this misinformation, bad information, can end up causing harm, because it's not quite what the actual situation is.
It's amazing how quickly something becomes fact, isn't it, when enough people say it with enough of a following.
Exactly. And especially, now we do a lot of work on claims on social media and things, and it's so easy, when that share button is right there, when you see something that you think, oh, I need to let other people know about this, I need to share with my friends and family, or I have someone who I have in mind that this will be super helpful for, and that share button's right there. And one of the things we often say is, particularly if you've got that immediate urge to, oh, right, I'll share this. I've had an emotive response. It's something that I've seen that has made me hopeful or angry or frustrated, or whatever that emotional response is. Always, that's something we always say. Just take a beat, maybe do a bit more research, work out where it's come from, work out what the actual fact is. Is it being shared by a reliable source or a health organization?
Or just head to full fact and check out what the answer is.
Exactly. If it's a specific claim, a fact checker may have looked at it. So head to full fact and have a see if we've had a look at it already.
Like you guys have the answers to everything. Let's talk about sun cream and SPF then, because obviously Rosie said you get a lot of questions around that kind of thing. And I can remember talking to you last time, Tom, about this. And again, thinking about it when we were on holiday last year. Does a high SPF mean only apply it once a day? High SPF, I guess, maybe over 50, should we say? Over 30? What does the SPF actually mean? Maybe that's a better question to start off.
Yeah, it's a common question that we get. So SPF stands for sun protection factor, and it purely relates to protection against UVB, the radiation that burns you. UVA protection comes in a different format, and you'll see that on the bottle. It'll either be circled, it'll have UVA, which is circled, or it'll be like a star rating. So SPF is, let's just take an example. Say for me, I've got fairly pale skin in the bright hot summer's day. Say when I go and sit in the beer garden and it takes me 10 minutes to turn red, the sun protection factor is how much longer I can sit in the sun before I go red. So if we say it takes me 10 minutes with no protection, a factor 30, you do 10 times 30. So theoretically, I could sit in that same beer garden with factor 30 on for 30 times 10 minutes. That's 300 minutes, which is 5 hours. And the product should protect me from the sun. Now, it's not quite as straightforward as that, because number one, that's in the laboratory when they did their test, and that's like perfect application of sun cream. And human beings were busy, you slap it on, the last thing you do before you leave your house. So the kind of advice for there is just to, if you think you're putting on 30, you're probably putting on 15, so you're reducing the amount of time you can spend in the sun. If you think you're putting on 50, you're probably putting on more like 30. So that's one thing about SPF. Similarly, we sweat, we brush up against things, we go for a swim, we towel ourselves down. The advice is to reapply every 2 hours. So I think your questions were, what does SPF mean? It's how much longer we could theoretically stay in the sun, and that relates to UVB. But the practical advice is just to apply a factor that you are willing to put on your skin, because typically the heavier the factors, the slightly thicker, and some people prefer. So we would recommend SPF 30 or above and reapply every 2 hours.
And just go back to the what's on the bottle, because I think the majority of people, I don't know, Rosie and Claire, if you guys come across this, but I imagine the majority of people probably just look at the SPF in terms of what, that's the only number on a bottle they would look at. And then there's a lot more, isn't on the back of the bottle?
Yeah, so there is a lot more on the bottle, and specifically the UVA is probably the one that gets neglected somewhat, and UVA is the one that it protects you from photo aging. So I think the biggest ally in this whole kind of campaign is the fact that people care what they look like, and photo aging is very real. For the listeners, I would recommend just Googling American truck driver like UVA damage or something, and it's an amazing image of a man who spent his life driving trucks in America, and UVA can go through glass, and so one side of his face has got the effects of photo damage and the other side doesn't, and it's quite a striking image. So in short, UVA, you're looking for either a circle around it'll say UVA and it will be circled, and that basically means you're getting at least a third of the protection of UVB, and that's the EU minimum standard. Or if you really want to go for it and you want to really protect yourself against the effects of photo aging, then you should go look for a sun cream which has 4 or 5 stars, and then you're getting basically equivalent protection of UVB to UVA. So SPF, to recap, SPF relates to your protection against UVB, the one that burns you. The star rating or the circle around UVA relates to your protection against UVA, and that's the one that typically ages you, but does also have a role in skin cancer.
I just want to I know, Claire, you touched on this. Let's just I just want to ask the question like really clearly. Like in terms of the chemicals in sun cream, because this is another thing we had with people on holiday last year. In terms of the chemicals in sun cream, individuals, and the impact on the environment, what's the kind of the fact in terms of the safety of the ingredients of sun cream, Claire?
When I was referencing that, one of the claims that we see is that sun cream can contain benzenes, and that's quite a common one that we have seen come up. And in terms of that particular claim, it is something that is not used as an ingredient in sunscreens. That's the first thing to say
Yeah.
about it. When it is present in some sunscreens, it's there as a contaminant. Benzenes are there is a risk of cancer with those. But as I say, if they are ever present in sunscreens, it's there as a contaminant. So we're also talking about very, very small amounts.
Yeah.
But as I say, in general, in terms of the ingredients that are in sunscreens, the ones that are in the market in the UK have all been tested and are safe to use, and they're lowering your risk of skin cancer from those UV rays.
Would it be different if you go abroad in terms of the if you buy a bottle from from a manufacturer that you recognise the name of, but it wasn't if it's being sold in, I don't know, the Caribbean or the Bahamas, where we were in there last year, and probably being kind, they're not as tight on certain things. Other kind of the other guidelines or laws, or is it kind of controlled in the same way as it is over here in different countries?
So I think this all stems back to 2021 when the FDA in America recalled the products containing benzenes, and basically, as Claire's mentioned, they found a few things. One, the products didn't contain nowhere near enough benzene in it to be harmful, and also in terms of benzene kind of risk, I think the actual risk is if you work with it in terms of occupation. So I think even though there is a kind of theoretical risk, the exposure that you'd have to these products would be, literally working with products at a much higher concentration day in, day out. And even then it's a kind of theoretical risk. So I think, and if you reference things like Caribbean and Bahamas, often the products are imported from, I imagine, America, who have kind of
Yeah,
more stringent things about sun creams because they're a medical product or a device ultimately. So even in the most stringent of kind of circumstances, the very products that were recalled were found to be low risk anyway. And in the UK and Europe, we just don't have those products. So I think
yeah,
you can safe to say the only thing to say in terms of kind of UVA ratings, SPF is fairly universal. In other places, you might see broad spectrum. That just means you're getting both cover on UVB and UVA. And I think in kind of Asia, they use a different system for UVA. But again, just if you ever see anything which says like broad spectrum, high UVA, UVB content, you're probably onto a winner. And if you've got any concerns about safety, I think the feeling is that the mineral sun creams, those are the kind of physical blocker ones, they tend to contain less of these concerning ingredients and are tend to be incredibly safe. So if you are concerned, then go for a mineral based sun cream.
okie doke. A, a, a big topic of conversation last time we spoke was the applying a sun cream to kids. I've got 3-year-old twins who, let's just say, it's tricky. What's the advice? We use one of the aerosol ones. We have been, just because it sort of like spared us from the tantrums a little bit. It's an SPF 50 one that we've actually had some delivered today for this week. But it's one of the kind of the misty sprayed aerosol ones. What's the advice for kids? And I'd love to know if those are any good.
So I suppose we've kind of seen a lot of new devices for applying sunscreen come to the market. I know on Dragon's Den there was kind of that roller that they brought on, and it kind of allows the child to almost apply it themselves, and it kind of was a bit more palatable to children in terms of applying that sunscreen. It's a difficult one though, I think, and I'm not sure. Tom, do you have any top tips in terms of applying sunscreen to the little ones?
Yeah, I think it is hard, Steve. I've got two kids myself, 2 and 4, and yeah, they hate the stuff. In fact, I've bribed the older one this year. I said, if you allow me to put sun cream on every day, by the end I'll get you some Lego. So we'll see how that goes. I got a bit of a side eye from my partner for saying I'm not sure bribing is the best form of parenting, but look, it's my campaign, it's my crusade. So
I I would argue with any parent who says they never use bribery. It's a essential tool in our armory, isn't it?
there are either bribers or liars. Maybe that's the But I think it comes back to the basics. I think it's really, really important that kids don't get burnt, because we know that childhood sunburn is one of the biggest risk factors for melanoma. So let's just put that out there. That is a fact. And so really, really, really try. And also, kids are growing. That means their cells are replicating. This is the time um, when cancers are basically an end product of mutations in cells, and and the more quickly they turn over, the more chances of they're going to mutate. And therefore, if you throw into the mix, a bit of UV radiation at that kind of stage, then you're two things. You're starting the process off earlier, so it's almost like starting that chain reaction is starting in childhood. So then you've got, instead of 10 years to create a skin cancer, you've got 50. So that's the first thing. And we just know that children's skin is more prone to UV associated, like DNA damage. So that's just an important one. So in short, it's really important that we protect our kids from UV. However, it's also really important that kids get to go outside. It's also really important that they don't have some aversion or pathological phobia of the sun. It's also really important that kids don't hate sun creams and sun products. So I think everything has to be done in a kind of balanced, nuanced way. But it comes down to the basics of any kind of sun safety, which is avoid the sun in the highest UV index. So typically in the UK, that's between 11 and 3. There are loads of apps now that will tell you when the UV index. If the UV index is over 3, then you're more likely to get sunburn. And at those times, if you can encourage your kids to seek shade, not go out in the sun, that's the first thing. B, this one's tricky. B is for broad brimmed hat. So if you can get them to wear a hat, maybe tie it in with some of their favorite programs or whatever, then that's helpful. And C is for cream or cover up or clothing. You can get SPF impregnated clothes now, which can be really helpful. So there are other ways to stay safe in the sun which don't involve the application of sun cream, I guess, is my point.
But the aerosols, are they any good?
I actually think you anything where it's everything to do with trying to gamify or make it interesting. And I think we definitely got some kind of purchase with using a different application. So I think we got one of the spray-on ones. So
Yeah.
it looks a bit like a water pistol. It's really funny when Daddy gets sprayed in the face. So and I'm here for it. I need the protection. But so yeah, I think you sometimes have to get creative, don't you? I think what else have I done? Leopard spots. They hate the feel of it ultimately, and sometimes it's a bit like ripping off a plaster. You just have to get it on and then move on. But
Yeah.
I think aerosol. If you found that they've enjoyed that one, then yeah, maybe I'll try. I'll get some on Amazon or whatever.
Um, let's get into sunbeds because I know this is a big topic, isn't it, for you guys? Claire, I imagine there are some. I imagine there's plenty of myth busting to do around sunbeds, or perhaps not myth busting, but just a bit of information that people need.
Yeah, so as I say, sort of like anything around about this time of year, it's about sun cream, sunbeds that we see, people getting ready for going on holiday, or who haven't been on holiday, who want to get that sort of holiday look. We see misinformation circulating about it. So it is important that people get that accurate information that about sun safety, whatever
What's
it is.
What sort of things do you see people asking or people wanting to know about sunbeds?
So as I say, we've seen claims, that like a bit of sun exposure, a bit of UV exposure can outweigh the risks of burning and things. Mentioned vitamin D and things earlier, so that's definitely something that we've seen sort of associated with sun exposure generally, and also sunbeds as well.
Tom, you're a big fan of sunbeds, aren't you?
I've never used one, and never been tempted. But yeah, let's talk a bit about sunbeds because, you know, again, they're illegal in Australia now, illegal in Brazil, Australia, and Iran, and in the UK and Ireland, I think they're illegal under the age of 18. So they're not great for you. They're probably synonymous with cigarettes and alcohol. Um, in terms of, and absolutely, I would not recommend using them. Two reasons. One, because in the way they work, I looked this up, that they deliver basically 95% of what they deliver is UVA. Now, UVA, remember earlier in the podcast, I mentioned that UVA is the one that gives you the immediate kind of protection. Oh, sorry, no, the immediate appearance of color, but it actually doesn't do anything to your baseline repair. It's not your body doesn't produce more melanin because of that, and therefore the idea that using a sunbed is giving you protections is false, just in the respect that the actual UV that you're receiving is basically giving you an immediate glow, but it's not doing nothing to your protection. So I think it's 95% is UVA, 5% is UVB. Another thing to say is one of the big risk factors for skin cancer is intermittent use rather than kind of cumulative exposure to sun. So the fact that you're putting yourself in a box which intermittently and then blasting yourself with UVA rather than UVB to give you that protection, is another risk factor. And then the other thing, who uses sunbeds? It's young people, typically, and as we've said, if you use the use of sunbeds before the age of 30 is another risk factor. So it's kind of like the holy triad of it encourages young people to intermittently expose themselves to UV radiation. Not a great idea. But I was speaking to my colleagues about this, and one of my wonderful colleagues came up with this phrase on the spot about a sun amnesty. About, listen, if you've used a sunbed, don't. We're not going to judge you. Everyone makes mistakes. Everyone has one too many beers or whatever. Not everyone. Some people, uh, me included. And we're human beings. We do things that, especially when we're younger and exploring the world. So if you've used a sunbed, if you come to a dermatology service, you're not going to get judged. But my recommendation would be absolutely to not use them going forward or ever at all because of the risks I've mentioned.
Are we anywhere near banning them in the UK?
That's a good question. I'm always a bit skeptical of banning anything because I think it just drives people into darker practices, and so prohibition didn't work with alcohol. So I don't think we necessarily need to ban them, but I certainly think it's a good idea that they've been regulated in the respect that children can't get access to them. I think the other thing to say as well is often the worry is that these services, often they have like packages where you get a certain number of treatments. So if you've paid for it, it's even more kind of licensed to go and get your money's worth. So my worry would be that they're not set up in a way that encourages like healthy use, even if that was to be a thing.
Claire, I saw an interesting area that we didn't really talk about last time, but an interesting piece on Full Fact, all about sunglasses. There'd been an influencer, I think, who had said that wearing sunglasses raises the risk of sunburn, and she also said the sun doesn't cause skin cancer. Well, we'll take that second one out because that's clearly a myth. But in terms of sunglasses, what's the fact behind sunglasses? And I guess what protection do they give to the eyes from the sun? But also, is there any increased risk of causing sunburn?
Yeah, so that's a claim that we have seen quite a few times, and I think the claim that you're referring to, the suggestion was that if you had sunglasses which block UV, and that's something that is recommended for your eye health, that you should check that your sunglasses do have that sort of built into them. that it was stopping. I think the claim that you're referring to was that it was basically stopping your body producing the melanin that Tom talked about earlier, and that was either making you more likely to burn across the rest of your body, or I think we've also seen claims that can increase your cancer risk and things like that, and that's not really how that works. So the melanin production in your skin is fairly localized. So if you are wearing sunglasses that are blocking out UV, they may stop you burning around your eyes, but it's not going to mean that the rest of your skin somehow burns more, or has an impact on other areas of your skin. So it's I guess maybe one of these claims that there's maybe some small kernel of truth in talking about how sort of the sun and the sunglasses and your skin interact, but the sort of the end result claim is nowhere near the science of it.
I just want to chime in here with I worked in New Zealand for a bit, and I met this amazing guy, and he he really sadly had been diagnosed with really advanced melanoma, but it was actually the back of his eye, the choroid, which you can't even see, which is so incredibly unlucky for this poor guy. And he was driving a lorry, and basically it pushed off part of his retina, which is the back of the eye. So the only way he realized that he had this incredibly late skin cancer was because his it affected his vision and he could no longer drive this lorry. So the the point I'm trying to make is it's really important that we protect our eyes. Just for the listeners, this is incredibly rare. It doesn't happen often. But in the areas that you can't see, then like you absolutely need to protect those even more, because yeah, they can be affected by the sun, and you won't be able to tell if you've got any changes there. So it's always stuck with me with an incredibly unfortunate, really, really incredibly rare but strange presentation of melanoma. And I would imagine, I don't know the science of this, and I don't think you'd ever prove this because I'm sure the numbers are quite small. But in my mind, you've got to be practical. If you know that UV causes damage to cells, then why would you not protect the cells of the back of the eye?
Yeah, definitely makes sense, doesn't it? I think the sunglasses is an interesting one. I think is how do you get? I mean, presumably you can actually get damage to the eyeball itself rather than a skin cancer thing. You can actually get damage to the eyeball itself if you don't wear sunglasses and it's extremely bright. Or what's
That's
the?
a good one. I'm not an ophthalmologist. Maybe if hopefully there's some ophthalmology colleagues listening to the call, they can dial in and. But I imagine, yeah, if it breaks down collagen, I
Yeah.
wonder what it do to like the actual vitreous humor, which is like the what makes up the eyeball itself. Um, I'm showing my limitations on my knowledge here. I'll
I-
stop speaking. But
yeah.
yeah, I imagine it does UV contribute to changes in the eyeball shape. I would imagine so, because
Yeah.
it changes other structures in our body.
Rosie, why do you think some of the myths that we're talking about today? Why do you think they do spread so easily? Why do you think we're so open to, uh, to being kind of led down the garden path when it comes to our son's safety?
Yeah, in I think they said spread so quickly nowadays because we are all so connected, really. And, it's you can have a platform, you know, regardless of kind of what your qualifications to speak on the topic may be. And I think, like Claire was saying, the majority of information that people release, it comes from a good place, and it's kind of well-meaning tips and tricks and advice that people are giving from perhaps personal experience. um in the same way that misinformation spreads so quickly, it's also so much easier for health organizations like ourselves to reach people now. So there are some positives in that, in the sense that we're able to do kind of podcasts like this, to put the facts out there, really, and do that myth busting. But I think it's just kind of making sure that the sources that you do go to are reputable. I think as well, because the way in which information can be delivered, it can be kind of these short, snappy videos. They don't take up too much of your time, and you might potentially get, maybe not the full truth. You might get the kind of kernel of truth that Claire and Tom have referenced as well. So I think it's about how we kind of consume information now. It's so different than how it was years ago. So I think that's one of the challenges that we have as a health organization, but also one of the really positive things that we are so connected that we can kind of reach people. Um, yeah.
I, I'm just gonna come in here and just say thanks, Rosie. And I guess the other thing I guess a slight mistrust of Western medicine or doctors,
Yeah.
and I think it's fair to say, and certainly again preparing for this podcast, it's not as clear cut as doctors and dermatologists thought it was. And so a lot of the messaging, so people are right, I guess, to question it, because dermatologists themselves currently are fighting this out in terms of how hard do we go on the sun protection uh, messaging, given the benefits that we get from the sun. And specifically that really comes down to vitamin D. But I think that the point I'm trying to make is that even within the kind of the medical profession in the dermatology world, there's no consensus opinion on sun safety because of emerging knowledge. And I think that's another thing to say about science and medicine. It constantly evolves. So one thing that used to be kind of orthodox and established, sometimes it changes with development. So I guess the public are right to question, but it's about how you validate that those um those uh those concerns, or how you explore them. And I guess with medicine it's about through robust trials and looking at data. But I think specifically about vitamin D, there's a professor, Richard Weller. He basically describes how vitamin D specifically from the sun is different from the vitamin D that we get from tablets, in the respect that it can have benefits for cardiovascular health, it can autoimmune health. So it's not as clear cut as sometimes we make it out to be. And maybe we'll talk a bit about vitamin D later.
Claire, makes your life pretty tricky, I imagine, when it comes to fact checking things that are even disputed by like some pretty reputable sources.
Yeah, definitely. And one of the things that we come up against quite a lot in sort of spotting these patterns of misinformation and trying to fact check it is, science moves slowly, whereas these claims and things that we see in the misinformation being shared can move very rapidly. People want an answer to the question they have, and often that part of fact checking is often not being able to say yes, that's correct or that's incorrect. There's a lot of gray area where we have to say actually science doesn't know, it's disputed amongst the scientific community, or just letting people know that it's not always exactly clear cut, kind of as Tom was saying, but where there is a consensus on a topic, being able to say that and let people know that in our fact checking work.
Tom, let's just mention vitamin D, because you did want to talk about it, didn't you? I think the are there some myths around vitamin D? Is there some kind of public service information we need to get out there?
Yes, I think it's we're gonna have to afford me just a bit of time to kind of organize this in my mind and how to talk about it. But there are a few facts. UV radiation definitely causes skin cancer. Okay, so all of those things are true, but they need to be balanced with the other health benefits that come from going outside and being in the sun. And specifically that comes down to vitamin D. Now vitamin D is very, very important for bone health. It's very important for lots and lots of different reasons, and some of them we don't fully understand. As I said, it can have a role in blood pressure, cardiovascular health, autoimmune disease. So it's clearly very, very important. Now in the UK, there's three ways that we can get vitamin D. One is through the sun, two is through taking a supplement, or three is through diet. Now, diet is largely things like oily fish, and the amount you'd have to consume to get enough vitamin D is not practical unless you absolutely love mackerel. So we're going to shelve that one. So then we're left with two options. So that leaves you getting your vitamin D from the sun versus getting your vitamin D from a tablet. Now, in the UK, we only can get vitamin D from the sun between the months of basically April to September. So in the other winter months, you're still going to have to be getting your vitamin D from somewhere. So I'd recommend taking a tablet for that. In terms of the vitamin D that we get from the sun, which is what Professor Weller suggests has all these other kind of health benefits, you only need about between 15 and 30 minutes of incidental sun exposure through those sunnier months between April and September to get that sun. So the messaging with regards to vitamin D, I think take a supplement because it's going to help you, and we're largely going to be vitamin D deficient in this country. And in the sunnier months, go in the sun for anywhere between 10 and 20 minutes without protection with your arms and face exposed, but don't get burnt. So choose times when the sun is not so extreme, and don't go as soon as you feel that your skin is getting warm or getting burnt, then obviously stop. But I want to be more clear. Just all you need is 10 to 15 minutes of opportunistic sun per day to get your vitamin D if that's a big concern.
So I guess just to kind of wrap up, or start to wrap up, obviously Full Fact is a fantastic resource for people to go and ask questions, find out the facts. But there'll be plenty of other kind of reputable places that people should go. Where should people find information they can trust, and also what are perhaps the signs of it not being something to trust? Claire, where else would you recommend people go other than you guys?
Well, obviously, come to fullfact.org if there are particular claims that you're interested in finding out whether or not they're correct or not, or you can send us a message and we can look at fact checking things. In terms of other sources, as I'm aware that we're not the only place out there. We recommend that people, the NHS website. Talk to your GP if you've got specific concerns. Other health bodies, cancer charities, Cancer Research UK is a fantastic resource for lots of information about all sorts of different cancers and safety and prevention, things like that. So there are lots of different places out there that you can go to for good information. And as Rosie mentioned earlier, there are lots of different ways of interacting with those. They all have social media presences, or you can go and talk to someone face to face with your GP, things like that. In terms of things that might suggest that information is something that you might want to have a bit more of a look at. One of the first things that we always tell people to look for when they come across a claim online that they're not sure about is there a source for that? Where does that information come from? Quite often with claims about health, we'll see that it's maybe someone said, "Oh, a friend of a friend told me this," or it's there is no source at all. So that's definitely one of the biggest red flags to sort of do a bit more digging, try and work out what the source was. Maybe search online to see if you can see if there are any reputable organizations or media sources that are talking about this kind of claim. And as I mentioned earlier, if it's something that makes you have a very strong emotional reaction, again, that is a red flag. It might have been framed that way to try and get you to click on it or interact with it and share it. At the very least, it should be something that's making you pause and check it out a bit more before you do.
And Rosie, I guess you've got plenty of information on this on the North East London Cancer Alliance website.
Yeah, we have a web page dedicated to sun safety on the North East London Cancer Alliance website. We worked last year on the campaign with our charity partners Skin, that's SKCIN, and they also have a wealth of information and resources that are available to the public.
What's coming up this summer in terms of campaigns? I imagine you guys have got something else planned.
We're working on it at the moment, Steve. Yeah, so we do hope to kind of reinvigorate things and bring this campaign back. So it's a bit of a watch this space at the moment while
Okay,
we
exciting.
finalize our plans. But we'll definitely keep you posted on it.
And it looks really good. That's what we should say. It's a slight
I
shift
know,
in the.
yeah.
Me and Rose have been privy to like the draft images, and it looks really great. So the agency
Oh,
are going to.
exciting. Well, it looks like we're going to have
It's
to come
great.
back and do it again.
Really exciting.
Have to
Yeah,
come back and do
if
another
you'll have
podcast.
us.
Yeah,
Oh, absolutely.
three times the charm.
And listen, before we're talking of three things, before we go, let's just get some top tips and for people to take away. Um, what are the top three things that everyone should know about protecting themselves from skin cancer this summer? And I mean, not even this summer, next week, or this week, depending on when this podcast has been released. What are the top three takeaways, Tom? Would you say?
Enjoy the sun responsibly. So by that I mean get your 10 to 20 minutes of sun on your skin so you get your vitamin D and it makes you feel happy. That's point number one. When the UV index is more than 3, definitely take precautions, namely avoid the sun when it's really, really hot. Sorry, the UV index is hot. And I want to make a point here that the skin feels hot because of infrared. You can get burnt on a cloudy day because UV doesn't actually cause your skin to feel different. So if you just be guided by the UV index rather than, oh, my skin feels like I'm getting burnt now, because the warmth that you're getting from the sun is actually from infrared rather than UV. So my top tips: enjoy the
Right.
sun responsibly. Uh, wear sun cream, at least SPF 30, and look for that UVA rating, and take the other precautions that I've mentioned. Avoid the sun in those times, wearing clothing if you can. And finally, protect your kids. Allow them to be enjoy the outside, but safely, as I've mentioned. I've thrown about 15 there. Is that
Hey,
allowed?
listen, that's all right for me. That's all right for me. The more information, the better, isn't it? Thank you all so much. I mean, like we said last time, I feel there's so much more we could talk about, but time has beaten us. Hopefully, people have taken a lot from listening. Hopefully, people will go and check out Full Fat, go and check out the other resources we pointed them to, and yeah, we'll look forward to seeing what you come up with for this summer, Rosie.
Great. Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Thank you all very much.
Yeah, thanks, Steve, for having us, and thanks so much, Claire, for joining us as well. It's been really great
Yes,
having you.
thank you,
Thank you
Claire.
for having me.
Thank you so much for listening to that episode. After we finished recording, Tom was a little bit concerned that we hadn't covered off the right amount of advice for black skin and for darker skin. So we jumped on a call the next day after he finished one of his clinics, and he gave me a bit more advice and a bit more insight for different skin types.
I think a lot of sun safety often is talking about sunburn and dare I say it, often the pictures of people who in skin cancer campaigns are white Caucasian people. So I think often this is a bit of a neglected point of discussion, and that's why I'm pleased that we've had this opportunity today to raise it. So essentially, the British Association of Dermatologists they describe sun damage as 4 different ways: sunburn, skin cancer, photoaging, and hyperpigmentation. Now, lots of people with darker skin types, they'll say, well, I've never been sunburnt, and sometimes they even laugh, when I ask in clinic, have you ever been sunburnt? And I have to ask because, you don't want to presume anything, but it's often, no, I haven't. And then interesting about skin cancer and darker skin types, the role of UV radiation in terms of those is slightly contentious, and actually skin cancers in non-sun exposed sites are more common in darker skin types. So again, it suggests that actually this whole UV radiation, how much of a role does it play in darker skin types? So that, with those two things kind of as an aside, there's still the very valid argument about photo aging, and we've talked a bit about the role of UVA, and so if you can protect yourself against that, then you're going to preserve the collagen in the skin. And I think it's reasonable to say if you're going to spend a lot of time in the sun, you're still exposing yourself to UV radiation, and of course there is going to be a degree of it's going to contribute to a risk of skin cancer. Um, so that's but the main point really is about the issue of hyperpigmentation, which can happen quite quickly, and it can be really difficult to treat, and patients often don't like the appearance of it. And I think that is one sign of photo damage or sun damage that often doesn't get discussed. And I just wanted to talk a bit about how people can like mitigate that, because the other complaint often with patients with darker skin is that the sun creams often leave like a white cast, which can be quite unsightly. So in short, the best type of sunscreens is like a mineral sunscreen, but with a tint, because often two reasons. One, aesthetically they look good, but two, the tint is often has iron oxide, which is an additional protective thing, which stops even visible light from contributing to hyperpigmentation. So I'll keep it short there, but it's just to say that it's still, the rules still apply, but in a slightly different way. And there is a far more articulate description and demonstration of this on the Skin of Colour training website, which is a fantastic website by dermatologists in the UK, all about the role of sunscreen for dark skin types. So I think it's www.soc.skinofcolortraining.org. So yeah, I hope that clarifies the question.